All right, great. Let me start out today by introducing our panelists. We have Kelly Abcarian, who is the SVP of Product Architecture for Nielsen. Also, I have David Krajicek, COO North America of GfK. Coming up right here. I have Simon Chadwick, Managing Partner of Cambiar, over here. And last but not least, Mike Gettle, CEO US of TNS. Good morning. So the question today is investments into mobile MR, where are they going and why? And with a subheading that is our analytics, big data, global panels, and enterprise-wide platforms, the key investment areas moving forward in mobile MR. And I guess I'll start with that question. Do you feel those are the key investment areas in mobile MR? Anyone?
Can you hear me at the back? Let me start out a little bit on that for you, just to get the conversation rolling. We track inward investment into the industry every year, so investment that is brand new to the industry from venture capital and private equity. It's been expanding dramatically. It was about 800 million in 2011. Last year it was 3.2 billion that came into the marketing, research, and analytics industry. And yes, of that, a very great proportion, somewhere over $750 million, was in big data analytics. Now that's self-reported, and I'm sure, a lot of investors are herd animals just like we are. And when they see the words big data and analytics put together in a business plan, it looks like a good idea. So who knows if it's just a fad? But big data by far is where investment dollars are coming in.
Okay. Any of you have anything you want to add to that, or is there general agreement on that?
From our perspective, there is. I mean, when we talk a lot about scalability of solution, when we talk about footprints that can expand both domestically and globally, we certainly are looking at new information assets, if you will. And there's also, very specific business reasons why we want to do that, that really speak to the needs of the market and integration. There is one point I would make that I think is important from an investment perspective, and that is in the context of how to bring life to that data. We're not at a point where you press a button and insights rain magically down from the information cloud. It's also going to require frameworks and context. So investing in IP in that perspective is going to be just as critical as those information sources. So I completely agree with something about where the bucks are going, but there's also some attention to be paid, from my perspective, around driving it significantly forward.
Which goes to another point, which then, as all of you being sort of suppliers, what is your company's role in this big data in the mobile world, and how do you see your role as a company? If you want to start, David, too.
Sure. I mean, I think that, and Dan, we talked about this just in the break really quick. I think that you're seeing this movement from collection to integration. I think our role in the industry or as an organization is one of information integration. As Ryan was talking about, there's a proliferation of information streams that come from using mobile as a data collection source, but also as a passive collector of information. And I think that becomes ever more critical, is how you bring together the what. You're not spending tedious minutes in time. What'd you do yesterday? What'd you do today? What do you have in your fridge? Instead, you can find those information sources that come into an information ecosystem, but then it ups the ante, right? You've got to figure out the why that drives that what behavior. And I think that's a significant focus for us. So it's becoming less or more agnostic to information sources, but identifying the right ones and developing frameworks that help to integrate and to tell a better and more compelling why and what the business needs to do to address that. So, and I think that's where we see ourselves playing in the industry going forward.
I think in some way, and I don't know if you can hear me. In some way, David, those things, they tie together. Our fundamental role in applying information to clients' business needs, I don't think is changing that much. But how we go about doing that is changing dramatically. So about collecting or creating data that didn't exist in the marketplace to scouring now great troves of data looking for the bit that applies to the business issue is key. How we go about, sample and questionnaire design and some more old form, techniques, and how we now get to data connection and, modeling and prediction.
Can you guys hear back there? Oh.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Can you maybe repeat that then, your answer, if you can recall it?
I can't repeat it exactly. There's no light on in here. Here we go. Is that any better?
There we go.
I think the gist of this was that, our fundamental role in applying information to our clients' business issues really isn't changing. But how we go about that, from collecting data, creating data that didn't used to exist in the market, to now scouring vast troves of data and finding the bit that applies to the business issue is a big change. Going from sampling, questionnaire design to data connection and modeling and prediction versus, crosstabs, all big changes about how we go about, doing a great job for our clients. But our fundamental role in applying data to business issues and helping our clients grow isn't really changing.
How about with you, Kelly, at Nielsen?
Well, this year, can you guys hear me?
Oh, why don't you pass the mic?
Yeah, that'd be good. For Nielsen, we declared this kind of the year of mobile. We've announced several mobile initiatives that we've undertaken in our media side of our business. And the focus has been on the fragmentation of consumers that you heard from the folks here just on the stage before us, Tony and others, which is, measuring via a probability panel becomes very challenging as consumers have more choices. And so what we've really been focused on, similar to what some of your points are, Mike, is that we really need to be able to collect the data in a unified way. So we've developed an SDK kit that allows us to embed it into every video player that is existing in the ecosystem, whether that's an app, running on an app, or running in a browser. And the whole idea behind that enables us to basically collect that data in a unified way and to make sense of that big data much easier, as well as to understand who's sitting behind those views and the audience that's actually consuming that content. And so we've done a number of efforts in mobile specifically because traditionally at Nielsen, we've done things in a very panel-based approach. And what we soon realized is in the world of mobile, fragmentation and consumer choice and the proliferation of devices to measure it via a panel becomes very, very challenging. And so we'll be rolling that out in the fall, and we've gotten a lot of traction of getting this SDK embedded into our media clients' apps and browsers, and we're pretty excited about it.
Very cool.
One of the interesting things that I think we found, and I think you alluded to this, Dave, and I'd like to hear what Mike has to say about it as well, is that the more that we talk about big data and these information streams and the fact that we're no longer in the business of data collection, it's data acquisition, data integration. At the same time, if the yin to that yang is a greater and greater interest in empathy, emotion, how it's leveraged, how you get to the why, how you get to the now what from that. And I think that's going to be a really interesting marriage between big data and how you leverage empathy.
Yeah, that's a really good, that is a fantastic point. But I do want to build off that because it is exactly the case that the why becomes the important engagement that we have with our respondents, with individuals, with consumers in the market. I mean, I think that's one of the keys here is that by getting the what out of the way, it frees us up for more detailed why investigation. I think that's one important point. The other is that I also think, so there's two things. There's the rational side that's going to really have to focus on information architecture and information science, and you know, we're not going to be able to do it all panel-based, and we're going to have to get used to the hurly-burly and the messiness that is that data and really be able to effectively weave it in, which is going to require a very different skill set than we've had in the past. But to your point, I mean, it's an excellent one, is that we need to have that sensibility around the whys that get into emotion, that get into engagement, and find creative ways, now that we're freed from the what, into the why.
You know, to build on these two thoughts, at some level we see big data as a threat to the survey. But I think we're at a really interesting time right now where big data can actually liberate the survey. You know, it's too long been the workhorse of the industry. It's done everything all the time. And now what we'll be able to do is use big data to get at the what, and use mobile to get at more targeted surveys around the why. And that could be more in the moment, you know, system one decision making. That could be, you know, more targeted subgroups that big data demographics don't get at, or it could be trends and issues that we want to get into much more deeply. And now we can do it with much more targeted short surveys that complement the big data. So I think they really enhance each other.
And that brings up an interesting point, sort of. So all of you on this panel, all of your companies have sort of gone through this transition from sort of the traditional marketing research and the survey to now a much more tech-based mobile world. Do you think that marketing research, whether it's on the corporate side or the supplier side, is at a disadvantage when it comes to the technology versus the technology companies? You know, where do you see that going?
So I think the speaker right before us made the point that, technology is coming to market research, and market research is coming through to technology. And I think because of the power of cloud computing and other capabilities, it's making technology to be very feasible for the more majority than it was 10 years ago. And so I actually think marketing research is a bit of an advantage because they have with them the rich arsenal of understanding how to make sense of this big data, of which a lot of the technology companies, they just get really geeked out when they see petabytes and terabytes of data, but they really don't know how to actually drive insights that are actionable for consumers against that or for clients. And so I think marketing research actually has an arsenal of tools that they're sitting on top of. These panels are very valuable. I don't think they're going to go away. They're going to augment big data. They're going to be the source of truth to be able to apply to big data. And they're going to be even more critical as big data multiplies. I think I saw a fact the other day that the mobile traffic is going to grow 15 times more than it is today in the next 3 years, 15 times more. So just imagine all that big data coming in that you're trying to sift your way through and make sense of. So if anything, I think marketing researchers have an advantage, especially if they hire some smart folks who know how to partner or collect or assimilate that data, because at the end of the day, it's about, to your point, it's making sense of that data, it's providing the action against that data. It's not about just talking about how many gigabytes of data you got sitting on your server.
Yeah, this is, I think those are really good points. This is something that we've been looking at Cambiar for the last few months. And to quote Paul Hunter of Dunnhumby, data geeks don't tell good stories. And we need the storytellers as well as the, as well as all of those who can actually get from an anthropological, sociological, psychological, whatever a logical viewpoint to what it is that the human being that we're looking at is actually doing and why. So it is a very, very exciting time when all of that comes together. I think it's dangerous for us to be looking at it as an us and them approach. I was in a workshop yesterday where somebody said, I'm from the tech side, I know nothing about market research, but market researchers are clueless about technology. And I think that's fairly dangerous. We've got to understand that the research industry is changing in the way it is composed. So last year alone, there were over 240 new startups in marketing research and analytics that received venture capital. 240 in this space alone. In the previous 2 years, there were another 250 or so. We've got 500 new companies wandering around. A lot of them will not survive, but they are part of our ecosystem. And therefore, we've got to understand how technology and researchers go together. And the other thing I would say on that is that in this country, we equate innovation with technology. In Europe and elsewhere, that's not always the case. Very often, innovation is equated with IP. And I think, David, you referred to this earlier. We shouldn't be neglecting that side of the equation either, and we shouldn't be thinking this is an entirely technological revolution.
Yeah, that's what I was going to actually build off of, is the notion that we really do need to be coming together, as I mentioned before, that in fact those data sources or big data will only come to life in the service of driving a business issue as we can put context and frame around it, and that's where the IP comes in. So some of the advantages of quote-unquote classical market research, I believe, are some of the tools, but more importantly, the frameworks for making sense of information and driving business decisions. I think that's key, but it's going to be requiring a team. The market research team of tomorrow is going to be maybe not so much always going to be, someone writing a questionnaire, but you're going to have an information architect in there who can identify different passive data sources that you can pull in addition to someone who's developing the questionnaire. So I think that you have to think more broadly about who's on your team, and that team's going to be platform players, it's going to be methodologists, it's going to be marketing scientists, it's going to be data scientists. So we need to be thinking about pulling a nimble and responsive team together in order to address the issues.
One interesting thing, this word nimble. It's interesting to me that all the money's going to the technology. There isn't a lot of money that goes to research IP. And it seems to be underlying that there's some thought that the technology is going to, win in the end. And, maybe if you can imagine a day where, the big data becomes static and its interrelationships become all known and well-defined, then bright technology people will figure out how to harmonize all of that, be able to, procure it, analyze it, visualize it. But I don't see a day really when all big data is going to become known and well-defined. And increasingly, the research world is going to have to be a lot more nimble. We can think of research methodologies that worked for years and years on principles like female head of household or, mass media, and they could work for decades. Things aren't going to work for decades in the future, and the world is going to be changing at an increasing pace. I don't know where Ryan is, but the day he finds his neighbor with the refrigerator that's connected to the internet, it's going to change things. And so nimbleness is going to be key.
Well, let's move on now. So we've talked about the industry in general, and I guess what I would like to know next, and I think people out here would like to know, is maybe ways in which you're using big data and mobile, if you can give some specifics with your clients, and where it's been helpful and impactful with any clients that you've had.
I'm happy. I have the power of the pen.
Go ahead.
I think, and this has come up in the discussion as far as, putting the client business issue at the center of what we're trying to do. And I think that's right at the heart of where TNS is. And we have taken a look at brand equity in particular, because we think, understanding what consumers think about brands is going to be important for a long time in the future. And in today's world, there's a lot of very fair criticism about the value proposition of brand tracking. So it seems like a pretty interesting place. So we have had a lot of work go into developing social data to be able to predict brand equity. And we've had a lot of success. We've done it in 4 categories over about 60 brands with pretty high correlations, and being able to do it 4 to 8 weeks in advance of when surveyed metrics would be available. So that's pretty interesting. We're just now setting out on how to apply social media to predict churn and loyalty in the area of satisfaction and how it can be used at the front end of innovation.
Okay.
But then kind of linking all that back to this concept of how big data can then liberate the survey, and we can bring these two together to have more complete answers of the what and the why.
Okay. So I think one of the innovative things at Nielsen that we've been working on the last 12 months is in the space of multi-touch attribution. So a lot of what we do is a lot of internal innovations, but we've been landscaping out the startup space in the last 12 to 18 months and really partnering with leading suppliers in this space of looking at both digital data and then offline channel data, and how can we basically help advertisers understand what is or isn't working that drives actual sales lift, ROI. And so one of the interesting things we've been working on with a preferred client as well as this supplier is how to basically ingest these terabytes of data that allows us to collect both the digital and offline channel data and then connect that into the advertising exposure data, connect it into the Nielsen sales data. And basically, in near real time, calculate the incremental credit that each advertising exposure is contributing. And so it's, I think it's pretty game changing. There's a lot of people in this space trying to figure out how to take the traditional marketing mix models and basically overlay kind of the digital, real world kind of respondent level data granularity you can get. And so we're pretty excited about some of the innovation we're doing in that space.
Yeah, for us, I think that I would describe it in two specific ways. One is using big data or information that provides a quick twitch marketing listening post. So similar to what Mike was talking about, really integrating in social media information into current measurement programs that provide for some early reads or some quick reaction that can be much more responsive, but still link up to the broader understanding of brand and brand engagement. The second area we've been focused on is also understanding this notion of weaving through the online and offline world. You know, the reality is consumers don't see it that way. You know, they've got holdable technology with a device, and they're going to be using it in a variety of ways for taking a journey of purchase for a particular product or a solution. So we've actually been doing work across a couple of categories on this notion of consumer purchase journey to really understand, you know, what the impacts are and the influences, both passively collected as well as dialoguing with consumers about those different elements in impacting the purchase journey. So those are two examples from our perspective that start to bring together both information that is out in the big data realm as well as more of that passive within individual data collection effort and weaving it into a program.
Okay. So sort of moving on, I think the next question that comes up that consumers increasingly want is the question of privacy and trust. Where do we go from there? I know, I think Mark Zuckerberg once had, from Facebook about 5 years ago, which is an eternity in the, you know, technology space, said, you know, anybody who has multiple profiles or wants privacy, you know, he doesn't trust them. And now, you know, there's Snapchat and WhatsApp, and you're finding some people are shutting down their whole public profile, and Facebook is having to do a lot with privacy. So where does that go with mobile?
To me, this is, if mobile is going to be one of the primary listening posts for us or information streams for us, we have to absolutely take care for privacy. We just did a study, GFK just did a study that we released publicly. In it, we talked to consumers. Half of them said that a third of them said that their data, their personal data, was misused in the last 12 months. Wow. And half of them are saying that they've actually avoided specific online services or service providers because of that incident. So you're talking about a third of the people now concerned about data privacy or feeling they've been a victim of misuse, and half actually changing their behaviors. So, you know, the extent to which we believe that consumers are willingly doing this, perhaps in the past, but when we see what's out there in the media with regards to data breaches, when we see what happens with regards to misuse, yes, there's a very real and compelling interest in having personalization and having a tool that provides you what you want when you want it. But there's some potential downside, and we as an industry need to take care of that. I think that's a critical issue. This could go south on us pretty quick if we're not upfront and open about what we're doing in terms of privacy.
Yeah, I think at Nielsen, privacy and trust is core to our values. Everything we do, everything we design, we build it in a privacy-protected way. And we work very strongly with privacy advocacy groups in Washington. When we designed this SDK that we're embedding across all these video players, across mobile and smartphone devices, the first concern from our privacy internal folks was, how are you going to ensure that the consumer feels protected? How are you going to ensure that the Nielsen brand stays trusted? And so we worked really, really hard, to your point, to really understand, how do we help the consumer make the choice? And so what we did is we implemented privacy by design principles, where basically we're going to ensure that every consumer has contextual awareness that Nielsen measurement is sitting inside. And so part of our mandate with all of our media clients and our cable operators that own these video players is that they actually have to embed language into the App Store description, as well as the EULA or privacy policy that clearly states that Nielsen measurement is sitting inside of this player, and here's how you as a consumer can go and either opt in or opt out of this service if you so care to. And so I think to your point, what I believe is as more access to the internet, because of these personal devices sitting in people's pockets, privacy has always been out there and an issue, but I think the accessibility of the internet has just grown tenfold with people being able to onboard through a smartphone or a tablet device that otherwise had to have a tethered line into their home to get internet access. So I think it's, the privacy issue continues to be out there, but I think it's kind of grown in visibility, if you will, because of the fact that more people are getting access, and then the concept of, is our privacy being protected, is it not? Some of the things that have happened in the last 12 to 18 months with the government, really kind of shook the confidence of the consumer. And I think the key is, as you mentioned, us as an industry has to ensure that we're helping the consumer understand that this industry values privacy and we value the consumer trusting us. And at the end of the day, there is a trade-off a consumer has to be willing to make, which is if you want personalization, you have to be willing to participate to get that personalization. So I think over time you'll see that people will get more comfortable again, much like they did on the online side of the world, and the younger generations, I think, will start to potentially change the tide.
It's interesting you talk about the younger generations, because just about 2 or 3 years ago, a similar survey to the one you did, David, at GFK, showed that the younger generations weren't that concerned about privacy. The survey came out last week, and I wish I could remember who did it, showing that the millennials are actually now the most concerned about privacy. And I suspect Edward Snowden had quite a lot to do with that. But there are 3 levels, I think, on which we have to operate with privacy, and some of them are moral levels, and some of them are practical. One moral level is we have to do the right thing because it is right. We are all consumers, we're all purveyors of information, we're all putting profiles out there, and we all want them to be respected. At another level, it's commercial survival. If we screw up on privacy in a big way, then we're going to have government and legislators breathing down our necks. And in this country, we haven't had as much as they have had in Europe or Japan, for example, on that, which is constantly a threat, an existential threat to the industry. And finally, there's the legal threat. We've all seen over the last year or two class action suits being put out against companies like ComScore, alleging nefarious activities with private data. And you know, the more they see these succeeding, the more they're going to keep on coming. So it's at all those three different levels that we really have to think about this very hard.
You guys capped it off pretty well. I would just say, because of all that, we live in a market where privacy trumps innovation.
Yep. And I think what's interesting too is in a fourth level is, aside from legal, there's also the economic issue. I'm from Minneapolis, and you know, Target had a data breach. They didn't misuse data, they were the victim of a crime, and their sales have plummeted 16%. So it's another motivating factor.
Yeah, I was going to say, in our study, we see millennials just as concerned about privacy as other groups. I think the one, I want to amplify your point about the value proposition. I think that is the key, is that, you know, if we're going to be successful at communicating and continuing to have individuals willingly opt into our ecosystems, we have to be clear about what we're doing to protect, but also what benefits they're getting. And I think that's really key, is that, you know, we can't just make this, we're going to build a big wall and you're going to be safe. It's going to be, there are opportunities for you to benefit as willing participants in the ecosystem. That to me is really key.
Okay. One last question before we open it up to the floor, and that would be, so beyond big data and platforms and panels, where do you see mobile going? Are we going to see biometrics, neuromarketing, the Internet of Things somehow tied to mobile as well?
One of the things that we've made a strategic investment in is neuroscience and bringing neuroscience to market research. We think, you know, a lot of understanding engagement and memorabilia of that message or that brand, being able to get that message right so that the benefits of targeting and other things that people will be more willing to opt in if they feel that it's beneficial to them really comes alive. So I think for us, neuroscience is a big focus for us, where, you know, our ability to basically measure people's brain waves both at the conscious and subconscious level to really understand what are people thinking when they're watching this ad, or what are people thinking when they're standing in front of that shelf. It's made a pretty big impact for our clients who have begun participation in these studies. And it's very actionable data, because as you can imagine, measuring someone's brain waves every single second provides very granular data as to what point in that video triggered a certain emotion, whether negative or positive, that then they can take action to fix that. Or maybe, you know, the ad recall, they related it to a different shampoo brand than their own. So maybe their messaging is way too blended with other brands. So for us, we think neuroscience is going to be a pretty big game changer, amongst other things.
This is the first time you're going to hear real disagreement on this.
Bring it.
Bring it, she says. No, we've been measuring, as Cambiar has been measuring for the last 3 years, future trends in research through our Future of Research series. And it's been interesting to see, particularly from the client side, a small spike in interest in neuroscience and then kind of a decline again, which suggests that, for the moment at least, this is more fad than real. Now, I know you put a lot of investment in it, so I hope it comes back up again. But if on the client side at least, it doesn't seem that that's really grabbed hold yet. I think I'm also skeptical about the Internet of Things. I've been hearing about the internet-connected refrigerator for a long time, yet to see one. But I think the Internet of People is a real potential, and I think wearables have an enormous potential, and in ways that we haven't even begun to think about yet. So that's where I'm placing my bet.
This is hard to suss out. I would be a little more inclined to go towards things that don't require as much wiring, that are a little more scalable in field and market, and lean a little more towards eye tracking, facial recognition, some of those areas. But I think we need to watch this entire space as things are changing.
So from my perspective, I think that if I think about the areas that are going to be rich for additional investment. I do think it is, again, identifying new and interesting passive data sources that are easily scalable or that provide new context. So, I've got a new wearable on right now. I'm completely with Sam. I think that the extent to which we start to see the Internet of People and personal information that can help to create context and understanding becomes, I think, even more important as we go on. So I think that's where we're going to see a lot of emphasis and a lot of focus.
Okay. And to your point, Simon, we did at Quirk's, we did a corporate research report, which actually I can make available out during the break. And we ask, what do you think, which techniques, which have high potential, and which do you think is a fad? Neuromarketing came down as sort of high on the fad side, but actually not sure, was about 50%. So it's unknown, but mobile was #1, followed by text analytics. But I'll make the whole report available. We have copies here. So why don't we open it up to questions from the floor? And I'd like to thank the panelists, by the way. So.
Thank you very much. First thing I'd like to say before I ask my question is back in the early 90s, when our online research was coming to pass, I remember going to these meetings and people, just like you all, were all talking about how we needed to resist online research because it wasn't going to be good research. And I really do believe mobile is going to be the next wave, and I certainly agree with you all. And I appreciate you guys are much more accepting of the new research. Question I have, though, is in the area of privacy, one big concern I have is this recent ruling in the EU where if somebody doesn't like something you find in the past, they can stop the big search engines from bringing that up. I mean, if they can do that, then they're going to start looking at the little search engines, and that could easily make all sorts of background or secondary research impossible if that spreads across the total internet as opposed to just Europe. What do you all think of that threat? Or do you see that as a threat?
Well, I think it goes back to Simon's point earlier about being forward-leaning and proactive about this, at least in North America. I think that it is clearly a situation that if left unengaged or left without us being forward-leaning about it, then you have breaches, you'll have people asking questions, you'll have a concern that we're not doing enough as an industry to guard against breaches or privacy. So I think instead of waiting for something to happen, we need to continue to reinforce and to lean forward with regards to a more proactive engagement, both with regulators as well as the broader industry and with consumers and consumer groups, so that we can avoid the kind of over-restriction on information.
I think the concepts are different between Europe and here. So whereas here we lean very, very heavily on the First Amendment, and I think that sort of regulation would be difficult to get past the courts. In Europe, there is this concept of individual privacy, the right to be forgotten, that is very, very different from anything that we think about here. Now, the ruling in the EU requiring Google to enable people to scrub stuff they don't like, I think it's caused a lot of angst. Whether it will then actually be enforced is another thing. But yeah, if it is enforced, you're absolutely right, Donna, it will cause havoc.
Hi, I'm Lisa Cortade with Merck, and I'm one of those clients that really likes biometrics and have found a lot of those measures to be incredibly helpful for understanding engagement, optimizing our advertising, and I'm curious, because we've had variable experience with different techniques. What are some of the challenges, Kelly in particular, that you found with mobile, and what are some of the techniques that you found most effective?
So obviously the mobile screen is a much different size, and people have certain expectations and kind of their willingness to lean back versus a traditional television viewing can become a very different setting. And so, I think we're starting to get into where people are asking for mobile kind of specific ads that haven't just been repurposed from linear television to be critiqued as to how they've kind of modified those. We're still in the early days of understanding, how different are those from kind of the linear when people's brainwaves are reacting to those things on a small little 3-inch screen versus a large 52-inch screen. So I don't have a lot of data to share with you now other than, it is a space that we're engaging in. It is a space that we see a lot of interest in, which is why I do believe that, neuroscience will be back on the up and up, mainly because I don't think you can just assume you can repurpose linear television onto a really small screen because, if you're not going to enable ad skipping, which is what all of us in the industry would like to see happen, then you've got to ensure that you find a way to keep the user engaged into a screen that brings a very different experience.
Oh, hello, I'm Fernando Weisenfeld, the president of the MB2 group and EFG. We are originally from France, but expanded in the US and Asia. Thank you very much for your very interesting comments. And I would like to wrap up a little, if it's possible, on the business point of view. Let's say that I am younger than I am now, that I'm exiting from a brilliant US business school, and I would like to start a business, successful business, obviously, in this area of market research, big data, mobile, and everything. And I would come to you and I would say, you know a lot of things, you have a lot of experience, so Mr. Expert, what would you advise me to do? How should I position my company to be successful, to raise funds, to find clients, and to sell with a lot of money in 5 years? Thank you.
Bernard, you know very well that's my business and I charge a lot of money for that.
There's probably a lot of routes to success, but I don't think you're too far from right if you start by focusing intently on a particular area of client business issue and learning how to solve that, both traditionally and with technology and big data. But I would start with the business issue and fold the technology skills in, and if you can hit that sweet spot where they converge, you do well.
Mazaluski from Verto. I really just sort of have a follow-up comment to the earlier question about privacy. In particular, most European countries, I believe not quite all, but the vast majority of certainly EU countries, already have a provision for consumers to be able to request that research companies remove their data that is tied to personally identifiable information. So the EU ruling really affects search engines and the big data sets, which traditionally have not really sort of dealt with that challenge. So from a researcher's perspective, the EU ruling is concerning primarily in those areas where if we're dealing with big data and analytics that are collected passively at a census level or at a near census level. In the US, I think I would say that the bigger concern is the Snapchat ruling that the FTC did about basically somebody not practicing what they were preaching in terms of their privacy management policies.
Okay, any other questions? Oh, there's one up front here, and then we should wrap it up and go to the break. So maybe the panelists can stay a moment, and if other people have questions.
Hi, Hi, my name is Kyle Henderson. I'm with the company UI. And earlier in the conversation, there was a bit of a thread that emerged, a little bit of friction between technology industries and the market research industries. What are the biggest barriers right now to those two coming together to do better for everyone? What's stopping great things from happening?
Give it a whack. I think part of it is to the standpoint of feeling like there are specific territories that you don't understand, or that are not your purvey, or that are your purvey and not somebody else's. I think that that's one of the biggest challenges. I think that we started to talk about, you know, when you talk in gigabytes or terabytes, or you talk in, you know, double barrel questions, or you know, address-based sampling. It starts with developing a common language and a common understanding and a context for what that team is going to do together. And I think that part of this is just growing pains, in that we are just on the precipice of, or the tipping point, if you will, around getting into really true integration of platform being as important as information collection and analytic frames. And I think it's about creating that context. I think the friction comes when you don't have shared understanding of where you're going, or common languages about, or common language about what needs to be achieved. So I don't think it's hopeless. I think it's just because it's early days and we're starting to flex those integration muscles, that it needs to work. So from my perspective, I think it's bringing teams together, defining common purpose, and everybody understanding what their role is on that team.
All right, thank you. I guess it's a break now.